She was beautiful, pregnant, and one day, she suddenly disappeared. This isn't some fictional story from a movie. This is a real incident that happened in a small American town to 7-year-old Lacey Peterson, a young, cheerful, loving woman who had the whole world ahead of her. Her life seemed like a fairy tale: a loving husband, Scott Peterson, a beautiful home, and immense joy for the baby soon to be born. But in an instant, all of this turned into sorrow, mystery, and the deep darkness of cruelty. On the 24th of December, 2002, the day before Christmas, Lacey suddenly went missing. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. Her husband, Scott, claimed he had gone fishing and upon returning home couldn't find her anywhere. It seemed like a simple missing persons report. But as time passed, this case wasn't just about a disappearance. Suspicion began to thicken. Scott's behavior struck the police and the public. As odd from the beginning, his statements were inconsistent. He showed no enthusiasm in searching for her, and instead, he was seen smiling at a candlelight vigil. Within days, he even sold the car she used. The media and the public began to label him as guilty, but nothing was clear yet. What unfolded in the following months shocked all of America. Did a simple fertilizer salesman really murder his pregnant wife and their unborn child? And why? What could possibly drive a man to so coldly and methodically destroy his own family? This case gradually became one of the most talked about and controversial trials in America. Suspicion around Scott grew, evidence piled up, and eventually he was put on trial. This story reveals the horrifying face of love, a web of lies woven to conceal the truth, and the mask of a man who appeared ordinary on the outside, but was twisted, emotionless, and perhaps even a killer. This is one of America's most complicated and mind-numbing crimes, the case of Scott and Lacey Peterson. In this documentary, we will explore Lacey's life, her disappearance, the shocking evidence uncovered during the investigation, the courtroom battle, and finally, Scott's true nature. Viewers, this isn't just a story about crime. It's about betrayal, self-centered behavior, and the brutally cruel decision of a husband, one that shook the heart of all of America. Lacey Denise Rocha spent her childhood in a loving, middle-class American home. She was attractive, intelligent, and from a very young age, her dream was to become the perfect homemaker. Her friends say she was extremely organized, caring, and positive-minded. Lacey was a girl who deeply loved flowers, gardening, and decorating her home. While studying in college, she pursued ornamental horticulture, the art of decorative gardening, and it was during this time that her attention was caught by a simple yet handsome waiter, Scott Peterson. Scott Lee Peterson, good-looking, well-groomed, and the kind of person who could easily make anyone feel comfortable. He and Lacey first met while he was working as a waiter in college. That meeting, as Lacey's friends describe, was love at first sight. The first time Lacey saw Scott, she told her mother, "I'm going to marry him." And indeed, within months, the two began dating. On the surface, Scott appeared extremely polite, cultured, and charming. He behaved maturely from a young age, which may have drawn Lacey to him. In 1997, the two got married. After their wedding, they moved to the quaint town of Modesto, California. Together, they bought a small house where they began their married life. Scott started working in fertilizer sales, while Lacey worked as a substitute teacher for some time. Their home was always filled with cleanliness, flowers, love, and positive energy. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect American couple, a beautiful wife, a hard-working husband, both dreaming of their future together, but all of this was only on the surface. As Lacey and Scott's relationship grew, Scott's true face slowly began to emerge. Scott was not emotionally available. He rarely shared his feelings and kept a certain distance. At first, Lacey thought this was typical male behavior, but she was wrong. Deep down, Scott was extremely narcissistic. He placed immense importance on his own needs, his career, and his freedom. He constantly craved praise, wanted people to call him perfect. Smart it mattered to him. And all of this was affecting their marital life. Within a few years of marriage, Scott began having affairs outside. Lockie sometimes noticed, but chose to ignore it. Scott's affairs weren't a one-time thing. Investigations later revealed he had physical relationships with at least 4 different women. One significant name among them was Amber Frey. But no one knew much about these incidents because Scott was skilled at lying, hiding the truth, and portraying himself as innocent. During this time, Lacey and Scott decided to start a family. However, they faced nearly 2 years of difficulty conceiving. Finally, in 2002, Lacey became pregnant, and she was overjoyed. She was preparing for her first child, from baby showers to decorating the nursery. She did everything wholeheartedly. Her mother, friends, and neighbors say her face glowed with the radiance of a mother. She looked peaceful, content, and loving. But there was a shadow in this happiness. Scott. His behavior was erratic. He never showed much involvement, avoided doctor's appointments, and the distance between him and Lacey kept growing day by day. Financially, their situation wasn't very stable either. Both of them were feeling some tension while managing the household. Scott's fertilizer sales job wasn't very steady, and Lacey earned very little as a substitute teacher. Their savings were nearly depleted. Yet, the two continued to project a lavish lifestyle to the outside world because they wanted to maintain the facade of being the perfect couple. Lacey's friends say she loved Scott deeply. She believed that once the baby arrived, their bond would grow even stronger. She was fully convinced that Scott could change, but something very different was brewing in Scott's mind. He was worried about his freedom once the baby came. Responsibilities would increase. He'd feel trapped, and the fear of losing his carefree bachelor life was taking root in his mind. This fear, slowly, had twisted into something far more disturbing. From the outside, the house appeared happy, prosperous, and loving, but inside, it was crumbling. A woman was immersed in her dreams, while a man was searching for a way to escape them. The illusion of the perfect couple seemed strong, but its foundation was fragile, and this very foundation later became the cause of a horrific crime. The 24th of December, 2002. People all over the world were celebrating Christmas Eve. In Modesto, California, the atmosphere was joyful and festive. But for the Peterson family, this day was anything but ordinary. Scott Peterson tells the police, Lacey is missing. Scott's story was that he had seen Lacey at around 9:30 a.m. She had been mopping the house that day and had mentioned she would take their dog for a walk afterward. Scott claimed he had decided to go fishing at Berkeley Marina and drove 90 miles to that location. But everything seemed oddly rehearsed, as if setting up an alibi, because according to his own account, Lacey had been cleaning the house since morning, but she was in her 8th month of pregnancy. Her doctor, yoga instructor, and friends all confirmed that she avoided strenuous activities like mopping or walking the dog in that condition. By afternoon, Scott returns home. Lockie's car is parked outside. The dog is alone in the yard, its leash still attached. But Scott doesn't seem immediately concerned. Instead, he cleans the dirty mop and bucket filled with water, washes his clothes, eats, and takes a shower. Only after all this does he call Lacey's mother. The police, however, were not called by the Peterson family but by Lockie's stepfather. When the police first arrive at the Peterson home, several things strike them as odd. There are 2 mops placed near the main door and a wet bucket nearby. The kitchen floor and the sidewalk behind the house are wet, as if recently washed. On the kitchen table, an open phone book displays a full-page advertisement for a criminal defense attorney. Lacey was known among her friends as organized, a neat freak, and someone who loved planning, so this careless setup didn't match her personality at all. Lottie's phone is found at home, but Scott pays little attention to her call history. The last person she spoke to was her mother at 8:30 a.m. After that, there are no calls or texts on her phone. Scott, however, doesn't call her even once all day. He leaves her a voicemail, "Hey beautiful," but only in the evening, by which time he already knows she's missing. Neighbor Karen Service says she saw Lacey's dog loose in the yard around 10 a.m. She assumed Lacey was nearby. But when Scott inquires about Lacey in the evening, he tells her he had gone golfing, no mention of fishing. This was the first major inconsistency in Scott's story. Neighbors and relatives quickly begin pointing fingers at Scott's behavior. He is eerily calm, as if none of this is new to him. Lacey's mother says Scott never showed the worry, the panic, or the helplessness that a husband should when his wife goes missing. His actions seem rehearsed, as if he's following a script. The police notice other red flags. In the bedroom, there's a large depression on the bed, as if a lifeless body had been lying there for a long time. Clothes are washed in the bathroom, and concrete debris is found in his truck. He owns a secret boat in a warehouse, bought in cash unregistered. And in that same warehouse, cadaver dogs detect Lottie's scent. Lacey's mother, her friends, and neighbors, everyone began to suspect Scott. Something about this story didn't add up. Behind the disappearance of a pregnant woman, something far bigger, far darker, and far more horrifying was hidden, and its shadows were now visible in every corner of that house. A few days had passed since Lottie went missing. The police were investigating. People were joining search efforts, but Scott Peterson was living in a completely different world. On the outside, he appeared to be a grieving husband to the media. He played the role of a sorrowful, emotional man desperately searching for his wife. But this was just an act. And the truth behind this performance was revealed by a phone call from a woman. Her name was Amber Frey. The 30th of December, 2002. The Modesto Police Department receives a call from a young woman named Amber Frey. She says, "I've been dating Scott Peterson, but I just found out yesterday that he is the husband of Lacey Peterson, the woman who's all over the national news as missing. The police are stunned." Because Amber adds, "Scott had already told me his wife was dead, and now, because of the holidays, he's finally coming out of this grief for the first time." Hearing this lie, the police realize one thing for sure: Scott is hiding something. With Amber's help, they begin secretly monitoring him. They start wiretapping and recording phone calls between Amber and Scott. Over the next few weeks, more than 12 hours of phone conversations between them are captured, all under police surveillance. In these calls, Scott speaks with chilling calmness. He tells Amber he is in Paris, celebrating New Year's, and busy with work. In reality, he is in Modesto, attending Lottie's funeral vigil. Police later confirm that while Scott stood in the crowd at the vigil, he was simultaneously calling Amber, pretending to be abroad. When Amber Frey, following police advice, continued these calls, she kept asking one question: "Scott, what is the truth?" But Scott never gave a straight answer. Instead, he constantly portrayed himself as the victim. He would say, "I've become so alone, no one understands me." But his tone, his demeanor, never once did he sound genuinely grief-stricken or confused. Scott's behavior at the funeral and candlelight vigils was also suspicious. At one vigil, people were praying for Lottie and her unborn child while Scott stood in a corner, laughing on the phone with Amber. Some noticed this, and it sparked massive outrage in the media. His laughter during such moments, his blank expression, and the fact that he never shed a tear, all of this began to deeply unsettle people. Slowly, the media and public attention turned toward Scott. A husband who avoids the press, shows no urgency in the police investigation, and laughs at funerals. If suspicion wasn't cast on him, then who else? News anchors, talk shows, and crime documentaries rapidly intensified their focus on the case. Amber Frey later held a press conference. She was calm, she was honest. She confessed to the world, "I was in a relationship with Scott, but I had no idea he was married. And when I found out, I immediately contacted the police. I want no part in this murder." Her responsible actions made her a hero in the public eye. Meanwhile, the shadow of suspicion over Scott only grew darker. A man who had supposedly welcomed his wife's pregnancy was now telling another woman that his wife was dead. This wasn't just a lie, it was bone-chilling. Scott's credibility was completely destroyed. Television debates, true crime podcasts, talk radio everywhere. The same question echoed, did he do it? The media hounded Scott relentlessly. Whenever he stepped out in his car, reporters chased him. Whenever he spoke, his words were dissected. A simple fertilizer salesman had overnight become a national villain. The police's attention had now become more focused. Amber Frey didn't just bring out the truth, she also presented a live example of Scott's two-faced, narcissistic behavior to the world. One thing became clear from these calls. Scott wasn't acting like a husband who would be frantic about his missing wife. Instead, he was acting like a man who was following a plan, playing each move strategically to make his lies seem believable. A few weeks after Lassie went missing, the Modesto Police Department thoroughly inspected Scott's warehouse, meaning his storage unit and office. This place was very important to Scott because he had hidden his fishing boat there, a small, unregistered aluminum boat he had bought in cash just a few weeks earlier. None of his family or friends knew anything about it. During the warehouse search, police found several suspicious things. Most importantly, they discovered 4 circular concrete marks on the boat's trailer, and the fact that only Lachi's torso was found, while the fetal remains were discovered separately, led prosecutors to present a theory. They claimed Scott had murdered Lacey and used concrete anchors to sink her body in the bay. Either the anchors weren't heavy enough, or too much time had passed, but parts of the body resurfaced. Lacey's head, arms, and legs were never found, making it difficult to determine the exact cause of death. But the torn tissues on her torso, the ruptured uterus, and the fetal remains being found separately, all of this was horrifying and deeply suspicious. Just a few days after everything, on the 18th of April, 2003, Scott Peterson was arrested in La Jolla, California. This location was very close to the Mexican border. At the time of his arrest, he was near his mother's house, but his condition was highly suspicious. The police found nearly $15,000 in cash in his car. He had his brother's driver's license, meaning he had planned to cross the border under someone else's identity. His hair was dyed blonde, he had grown a goatee, and was clearly trying to avoid recognition. The car contained survival gear, camping equipment, and multiple cell phones. As soon as Scott was arrested, he was allowed to apply for bail, but the court outright denied it. The court believed Scott was a flight risk, meaning he could try to flee the country. The public was also pleased with this decision. Scott's behavior, dyeing his hair, carrying fake ID, having cash, all of it, in the eyes of the public and the media, screamed one thing: he was running. The pressure from the media, the public's anger, and Scott's cold, emotionless demeanor, all of this began turning suspicion into certainty. Across the country, talk shows, news headlines, and television documentaries were all focused on one question. Scott Peterson is guilty, but how will justice be served? In June 2004, the highly publicized trial of Scott Peterson finally began. The trial venue was moved 90 miles away from his hometown to San Mateo County because in Modesto, the media coverage and public outrage had grown so intense that it was impossible for Scott to get a fair trial there. In the prosecution's opening statement, a direct motive was presented. Scott wanted freedom. He didn't want responsibility. A new baby, a stable home life, financial stress, and marital commitment, all of it was a burden to Scott. And at the same time, a woman named Amber Frey entered his life who, in his eyes, represented a new beginning. Amber Frey stood in court and gave a deeply shocking testimony. She had been in a relationship with Scott for only 2 months. But during that time, phone tapings of their calls were played in court. In those conversations, while Amber was unaware that Scott was married, he told her that he had lost his wife, and he said this on the very day when Lockie was still listed as missing. Amber clearly stated that Scott constantly contacted her, gave her assurances of love, and pretended to be a calm, innocent husband. But these same recordings revealed a different side of Scott, a manipulative, narcissistic, and sociopathic personality. The defense team had a different approach. Their main argument was, there is no direct evidence. Meaning, no murder weapon was found, no DNA from Lacey on Scott, and no significant blood evidence in the house. They tried to argue that everything was circumstantial, based only on suspicion. The defense attorney said, he was a cheating husband, not a killer. But the prosecution presented the circumstantial evidence so methodically that the jury began to see a pattern. Scott buying a boat, making a concrete anchor, studying tide patterns before Lacey disappeared, not opening fishing lures, not calling Lacey, and his overall emotionless demeanor, all of it pointed toward a psychologically calculated murder. Then came the most chilling question. How exactly did Scott commit the murder? The prosecution's theory was horrifying. They claimed that Lacey was killed on the night of the 23rd of December or early morning of the 24th of December. Scott committed a clean murder, meaning no bloodshed, likely through strangulation or suffocation. Perhaps he smothered her with a pillow while she slept. Then, he wrapped her body in covers and placed it in his truck. He went to a warehouse to prepare the anchor and then used it to dump her body into the San Francisco Bay from his boat. He used the boat in an area where the tide was strong, ensuring the body would be carried far away. But 5 months later, the tide brought parts of the body back to the same area where Scott had claimed he was just fishing. Scott's behavior in court was the same, calm, cold, like a stranger. His face showed no grief, no guilt, no regret. On the contrary, it was hard to tell what was going on in his mind. The jury also noticed this during Lockie's pregnancy. Scott never showed any softness toward her. There were no signs of the excitement expected from an expectant father. After nearly 5 months of trial, over 180 witnesses, forensic specialists, neighbors, and friends testified. The entire country was watching the case, became a breaking point on news networks. Finally, on the 12th of November, 2004, the jury delivered its verdict. Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for Lockie's death and second-degree murder for the death of baby Connor. People in the courtroom let out a soft gasp. Some shed tears of relief. Outside, the crowd erupted in applause. Justice had prevailed. Then, on the 13th of December, 2004, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty for Scott Peterson. The courtroom was eerily silent as the decision was read. Scott, however, remained as expressionless as ever. On the 16th of March, 2005, Judge DeLucchi sentenced Scott to death by lethal injection. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison, but Scott's family continued to file appeals. They insisted, he is innocent. His affairs don't mean he's a killer. Scott himself told the court, the media has villainized my character. I may be a bad husband, but I'm not a murderer. However, many mental health experts, reporters, and true crime writers disagreed. In their view, Scott was a textbook narcissist, someone who craved the spotlight, control, and admiration. He may have wanted Loki's love, but when the baby's arrival threatened to take attention away from him, something twisted formed in his mind, and he destroyed an entire life.